Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by Eric Overfield, Microsoft Regional Director, MVP at Pixelmill USA, who will be talking to you about the must-know secrets of proper SharePoint site provisioning. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC18. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is packed with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeeurope.com/resource-center. Also, tomorrow, Friday, 7th of September 2018, is the closing date for the European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community Awards. Do you have a project based in Europe that you and your team are really proud of? Why not share your learnings with the community, celebrate your success, and recognize the brilliance of your team's efforts? Enter today at the address shown. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have for Eric in the questions window. Some questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and will be added to the Resource Center, where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Eric Overfield. Hello, Eric.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How's everybody doing? Hopefully really good. Can you hear me just fine?
Yeah, take it away.
All right. Let me know when the screen is shared.
Yep, we can see
All
it.
right. Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining me again. Happy to be back, Shane. It's always a pleasure to be a part of the European community here. We got a full hour, so we're going to have a lot of fun. I want to look a lot investigate a lot about what we can do with provisioning sites, provisioning assets, provisioning components within SharePoint, in particular SharePoint Online. Some of the aspects here are translatable to SharePoint On-Prem for sure, but we're really going to focus on SharePoint Online here because that's what I think is going to be the most interesting. I'm leaving this slide up just for a few more seconds. In the lower right-hand corner, there's a couple of links. The top link is this slide deck. So if you'd like to download this slide deck right now, you can. It is case sensitive. It needs to be exactly that link there. But you can always get a hold of me later if you're unable to download this slide deck. So that way you've got all my links and references, because I'm going to go reasonably quick. And there's a lot of details I'm going to have to skip because this is more of an overview of different options. So if you want to learn about specific things, I've given you all the details you need to go spend the next couple of days kind of researching those specific topics. And the last link is a link to my GitHub repository. So if you would like to download the code and samples that I am using, because this is basically all demos. We're looking at a few slides and a whole bunch of demos here. You can download all that stuff as well. So I'm going to go ahead and move on, if I can. Okay, yeah, so my name is Eric Overfield. I'm president, co-founder of Pixelmill here in California, USA. I am a Microsoft regional director. I've got Microsoft MVP recognition in two categories, both the Office apps and services, as well as Office development. I'm deeply involved in the SharePoint and Office 365 and Azure communities around the world. I've been coming to the ESPCs now since Barcelona, which has just been a real pleasure, and definitely looking forward to Copenhagen. So I hope to see you all there. Great ways to get a hold of me, ericoverfield.com or @ericoverfield. Always love interacting and engaging. My big thing right now is the SP or SharePoint Starter Kit, github.com/SharePoint/SP-starter-kit. If you have not heard about it, Google it. You're going to do yourself a favor. It's the SharePoint Starter Kit. Really cool community-driven project that helps you accelerate your Office 365 and SharePoint journeys. So definitely recommend that if you're looking into the modern experiences. And quickly about Pixelmill, so you know who we are. We are based in California. We're a SharePoint digital agency based in California that's helping our clients combine Office 365, SharePoint, and Azure to build really good communication and collaboration solutions that will truly further that ubiquitous, that digital workspace, the big buzzword that everyone's talking about. But it comes to being an actual real thing that we're all trying to connect digitally. We definitely help our clients do that. The overview for this morning or this afternoon, evening, depending upon where you are, there's a couple of basic things I want to look at, which is really about provisioning, but we have to start at the beginning. I want to look at what is available and how we can provision SharePoint sites straight up out of the box. Like what can we do without any kind of code or anything, like just what's available. We're going to then move on to site designs and site scripts so we can see the Microsoft preferred way to start to build our own sort of provisioning assets, but at the same time still driven by their user interface. Past that, I want to move into some more code options that are available. Some of them are more deeply coded than others, things such as P&P provisioning. And then if we have time, I really want to look at some automated techniques if we really combine some interesting ideas such as Azure Flow, Power-Ups, and more. Now, one of my demos, which is kind of fun, I was looking to combine SharePoint framework with provisioning, and worked just great. And then Microsoft yesterday rolled out SharePoint Framework 1.6, which is actually a very exciting thing. But in the process, they need to roll out some Azure Active Directory updates, which aren't out yet. So we're not going to see that one specific thing happen, but I'm still going to go over all the code. We're going to look at it, and I'll even show you the error you're seeing right now. It's been logged. Microsoft's very well aware of it. So that you'll be able to use the code in the future, and I'm sure it will work just fine later today, tomorrow, etc. So let's just dive right in. Provisioning SharePoint is all about creating new SharePoint sites. Those could be our comp sites, our team sites. That could be even our classic sites as well. So classic ways to be doing this, or ways where we're doing this now, of course, you could go in and you can create an Office 365 group. You do this, you can create these groups easily in Outlook or Outlook Online. When you do that, this is something that end users can do. And of course, you can, tenant admins can control this. But what this will do, not only it will create a group, it will also go and create a SharePoint Online. It'll create a SharePoint Modern Team site in the backend. So you've got a SharePoint team site as soon as you create a Office 365 group. So that's a great way to do that. The other thing you could do to easily create a site, of course, is you could go to the SharePoint homepage. Just you go up into the little waffle, you go to SharePoint, and you click on SharePoint. And that's something, again, end users can do from the SharePoint homepage. They can click on New and then Site, and they can then create new team sites and new communication sites, again, subject to tenant settings. So you can say that's not allowed if you're a tenant admin. But for those tenants that are allowing it, or for those users that have their permissions, you can quickly create modern team sites and communication sites using a common UI that works really well, and it definitely creates a nice, fast, rich experience. The third real way that I want to talk about from the administrator perspective is you can go into your SharePoint tenant administrative area. This is something only for tenant admins, but from there you can also create modern team sites, modern communication sites, as well as you can build classic experience sites. So if you want to build, if you still need to provision some publishing sites or some classic team sites, etc., that's still available in SharePoint Online for you. You would do that by going into the SharePoint Admin Center, and you can go ahead and create those kind of experiences. So I told you this is going to be a lot about demos. That's what I really want to do. So let's start with our first demo here. What I want to do is basically go and look at those different experiences that we have when creating and provisioning our sites. So here I am, I'm in Outlook Online. And if I go ahead and I go to my different groups here, and I go to more groups, I can go ahead and easily create a new group if my tenant allows it. And of course here, we're allowing basically anybody to create a group. So I can create a group, and I could create a demo ESPC webinar group. I can go ahead and say, well, I really would rather be public, let's say, and I don't need anybody to email now. I can go ahead and create that. And as this group is being spun up, which won't take very long, within a few minutes, we're also going to have, actually be quicker than that, we're going to have a team site being, a team site will be created in the backend as well. So that's kind of like the first easy way. I'm sure a lot of you are doing that, but it definitely works really well, and you do get the whole group experience. Well, another thing you can do is if we go to SharePoint, we can go to the SharePoint homepage. So we can click on SharePoint from the waffle. When that loads up, eventually, there we go. We have create site at the top left-hand corner. And so this is something end users can do. You don't necessarily need to be a team admin if you've set this up in the tenant admin, of course. And from here, you're going to be able to add team sites as well as communication sites. So these would be modern team sites that are connected to a group. as well as communication sites. As this loads, it's been a little slow for me today for some good reason. I guess out here in California, everyone's still waking up, so the internet's trying to wake up as well. There we go. So we can go ahead and we can click on a team site. And what will happen is we can then choose a design as well. Now, by default, for when you do this, if you create a team site, you're not going to see any real options for team sites. You're basically just going to create a team site. You can see I've already set something up, which we'll see in the next demo, which is something called site designs, where I've created additional basic site templates. They're called site designs, different structured templated sites, so that I can create a different type of team site. And we have the same thing over in communication sites as well. Now, if I go ahead and create that team site, we'll do that later. That would go ahead and spin up a team site also connected to an Office 365 group. Whereas if I chose a communication site, you will see that I do have some default communication site designs. These are created for us out of the box, the topic, the showcase, and the blank. Here, this is not connected to an Office 365 group when that's created. That will get created if you create a site, and a few minutes, you've got yourself a nice site. So the last thing I want to do is, at this point, is look at the SharePoint Admin Center. So if you go to your administrative area and you go to your admin centers and you go to SharePoint, now again, you need to be a Office 365 tenant admin or a SharePoint admin, tenant admin, to be able to get these options. So if you don't have an admin tile in the waffle, which would be admin, and you didn't see that page, you're not going to be able to have access to this. So do please keep remembering that. When you do load the SharePoint Admin Center as of today, what happens is you're going to be, what's going to load up is the general site collections page. And from here, you can create classic experience SharePoint sites. So if you go ahead and create a new site collection, here you'll be able to create classic team sites, publishing sites, and everything else. And this will then create a classic site for you, and it will take typically more than a few minutes to create because this is using the older site creation process, not the newer one. So it's a little slower. From here, if you wanted to create a modern team site connected to a group, or if you wanted to create a communication site, you can actually do that. But as of now, what you'll have to do is you'll have to go into the new admin center and click on the try a preview. That would be a button in the upper right-hand corner. What's going to load up here is the new administrative center that Microsoft is looking to roll out. And so one of the options we have on the left-hand side is site management. So from site management, we can now see all of our sites. The previous page, by the way, where we were looking at the site collections, we were only seeing classic experiences. I should have said that then. If you go to site management in the new admin center, you actually get to see all of your sites. And if you want to see sort of how that might look like, if we go ahead and reorder the list by template, you can see the different templates that are being used. We can see just while this is being loaded, we can see communication sites. There we go. We've got the publishing sites, so those would be our classic experiences. And then at the bottom, we're going to see team sites, which would be the way this works. Unfortunately, is that I see team site. Both are going to say team site, but your classic sites will sort of have the parentheses saying the team site classic experience. But from here, you can create a new site, which is pretty cool and sophisticated. It's really quick. And it looks basically the same as from the SharePoint homepage that we saw before, where you can create a team site or communication site, but you can still create older classic experiences from here as well. So lots of ways that you can create sites and provision new sites out of the box. We've done, of course, no new anything. We just had a little bit of permission. We can now spin up different kind of websites from different options. Now, as a side note, while I'm on this page, one of the things that I want to be able to do later in this demo, which I don't think will work, is there's this API management. If we click on API management, we're getting a message as of today, which is access to AAD resources using the SharePoint framework will be available soon. If you're seeing this error, most likely this is something that will get solved very, very soon. Basically, I would assume probably today or in a day or two, they're probably rolling something out. We'll go into why this is not working, and if you find that this works for you, great, you're good to go. If you don't get an error message, you're definitely set. All right. In interest in time, though, let's kind of keep plowing ahead because I want to do more than what's out of the box. I'm sure a lot of you already seen the out of the box stuff, but I just wanted to level set and ensure that we all saw some of the primary ways that we can spin up our new SharePoint sites. So let's move on. Let's go ahead and let's look at site designs, which are the next component, the major component that Microsoft's provided for us to build custom templated sites. Basically, if we want to create a team site or communication site that's provisioned, pre-provisioned in a special way, site designs is our way to do that. Now, the last webinar that I did for ESPC was actually a whole hour on site designs and site scripts. So here I'm going to have to sort of skip a lot and just sort of talk about the high level components, which is basically that site designs is a way to build a provisioning methodology for us to provision our own type of site, our own team sites or com sites within the SharePoint experience itself. So although it will take some PowerShell or some code to add a site design to your tenant, once added, with security trimming allowed if you want it, users can just go to that create site experience and they would see your site designs there so that people can provision your types of sites that you've created for them on a tenant by tenant basis, of course. How this all works is using something called site scripts. So a site design is sort of a collection of metadata. One of the components is a site script. A site script is it's a JSON-based file, which is a set of verbs or a set of actions that you want to occur in order to turn say an out-of-the-box communication site into the communication site that you're trying to build. One of the big things that we're going to look at, and I think our fourth demo, is we're going to extend site designs by using flow as well. So one of the actions is you can trigger flow, which is kind of cool. So some common site script actions might be to add a column, to add a content type, to add a list, to add a library, to do something like that. But let's say you wanted to add a web page. What if you say you wanted to set a new homepage or something? Those things are not easily achievable using site scripts at this time. But what you can do is you can just have your site script trigger flow and have flow go ahead and do that for you. How this idea works is that once you've added a site design, when someone goes to create a new site, let's say here they want to add a communication site, they're going to be given the option to choose a design. And so we might see that our custom design is also listed there. Again, that can be security trim, so you can create site designs that certain people don't have access to. So if someone were to select that they wanted to provision the new custom communication site design, what happens is that during the creation process, when the site is being created, the out-of-the-box communication site is being created for you by SharePoint, then the site design is going to get loaded and the site scripts are going to get executed by SharePoint. What happens is the site script is basically, it's a recipe of the things that will need to occur on top of the out-of-the-box communication site, which is a really good thing. And I'm pointing that out because in classic SharePoint, we used to build site templates, which were snapshots of time of what a site would look like, and then we just made our changes on top of that snapshot. That's not the case with site designs. Site designs always provision the out-of-the-box experience that Microsoft provides first, the most recent one for communication sites or team sites. As soon as that's been provisioned, then your site scripts are executed, and in the right-hand side of the site, you actually get a feedback of how your site design is being applied, which is really cool. And at the end of all that, which typically can take seconds or maybe a minute, you'll then have your beautifully branded and beautifully configured site the way that you intended it to be for your end users. So let's go ahead and let's look at a site design. Again, I have to skip a lot of the components that we may want to look at just because in interest in time. So I provided a link to site designs, and there's also a recording from the webinar that I did a while back, so you can always go get a whole hour on this kind of thing if you want to. Okay, so some of the things I'm going to do here, I need to connect to the my SharePoint Online tenant. I'm going to be using PowerShell to do all of this, and so there are some prerequisites to be able to run PowerShell. That's all found in the documentation that I provided. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to connect to my tenant using the Connect SPO service. And from here, what I can do is I've got a couple of commands. I can do get SPO site script, and what this will do, site script. This will go and get me a list of all of the site scripts that I've already created because the site designs cannot get created until you've built your site scripts. And again, your site scripts are a recipe of the kind of actions that you want to build. So what's really pretty cool is you can say, well, I want to actually get a specific site script. If I'd like to see all of the site actions within that site script, I can just use the ID, and you can see all of the aspects of the site script that are going to get executed by the site design that loads such a site script. Okay, so there's all of this content here. Let's go ahead and let's quickly look at what a site script might look like. This is all of my demo, so you've got my code if you want it. But what you're looking at here is a custom site script that I created. It's JSON, so for those of you not into code, it might look a little weird, but those of you who've been working with JavaScript at all, this should look pretty familiar. What we have is we have a list of actions. Within a list of actions, we have basically an array of verbs. Each verb tells the site script what it is you're looking to do. So here I'm looking to apply a theme, and then I give it a theme name. Maybe I want to set a logo. Maybe I want to set external sharing, or I need to set some columns. The best way to find out how to build these is to look at some samples provided by Microsoft on GitHub, as well as to look at the JSON schema, which is all found over on docs.microsoft.com/SharePoint. What's cool about site scripts as well is they can actually have sub actions as well. So let's say I wanted to create a content type. I can go ahead and say, well, okay, what are some of the columns that I want to have within that content type? It's a pretty big file here that I've created, but basically it's creating a document library, and it's spinning up some extra things in the back end. All right, so let's go ahead and let's add this site script to SharePoint. Now the way I'm going to do it is I'm basically going to be using PowerShell here, and I'm going to set a variable script, and I'm going to set that to the string value of the file you just saw. So I'm going to scroll way down here. I know this is really super fast, but it's a lot of data. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to load that up into memory. So now it's available here. So what I can do is I can run a command, add SPO site script, which again is PowerShell command, part of the SharePoint Online Management tool. I can give it a title. I give it the content of the site script I just had, a description, and basically I'm good to go. So let's go ahead and execute that command. I don't want to have to type all that out. It's going to get created pretty quick. So what I can now do if I wanted is I can just go ahead and go get that site script. Now let me scroll up. Again, I know this is scrolling a lot. And we can see though that I created this provision test site script just now, and I've been given an ID, and I'm basically good to go. I can now use this site script in any site design that I might want to work with. Great, okay. Well, there's a similar command that I have for site designs. If I can get SPO site design, and I can go look at all the current site designs that I have available to me. And if we scroll on up here, you'll see that I have 2 site designs that we saw in the UI when I was looking to create a team site. All right, well, let's create another one. This is a little more simple to do than creating a site script, because creating a site design, we basically need to just run a command, add SPO site design, add SPO site design. We give it a title. We need to give it a web template. Now there are 2 web templates currently available to us. There's ID64, which is a modern team site, and there's ID68, which is a communication site. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add here a team site. I'm going to tell it to use the site script I just created, and I'm going to send along the ID of it. And I should be good to go. That's basically it. All right, so let's go ahead and execute that. You see how quick that is? Isn't that pretty cool? All right, so let's say if I go ahead and I get my SPO site design again, and you'll see that it just added the provision team site design demo that I created just a second ago. So if I now go ahead and go back to SharePoint, and I go ahead and let's basically just reload this page. I don't actually have to reload. I can just click site. And if I go to a team site, I should now have on my site design, my provision team site site design demo, which if you think about it, think how fast this is all working. Like classic SharePoint was a lot slower. This is working pretty quick. The commands run pretty quickly. I go to SharePoint, I'm able to create a site using that design right away. I don't know, I think that's pretty cool. All right, so let's do ESPC webinar demo 1809. And let's go ahead and click just next, and we're okay with that. The site's being created here. It's finished. Wow, isn't that so quick? I love the new experience. So I'm being redirected now to the new site that was just created. And what should load up here on the right-hand side when this is done is we should see a panel show up on the right-hand side, which there it goes. So it tells us, it gives us feedback that it's getting things ready, that my site design is being applied. It's currently initializing it. There we go. And it's running through and it's telling us what's happened here. Now, there's something interesting here that's happened. I got an error message. Oh, that's really actually a good thing. Well, it's not good that I got an error, of course. Basically, the error is that I'm trying to set a logo and it's not able to do that for team sites. Okay, but I'm getting good feedback, so I can find out, did things go well, did things not go well, and what all did in fact happen. So if I go ahead and if I click on view updated site, now, well, before I do that, if you look at the bottom, some of the actions are pretty cool as well. We can actually install a SharePoint Framework app if we wanted. Ooh, that's pretty cool. And we can even activate web parts and extensions as well. So when this gets reloaded, there'll be a few little subtle changes, but look at the top header. You're going to see something new kind of come around, which I think is pretty cool and sophisticated. So this will slowly load here, hopefully quickly. There we go. It's coming together. So you're not able to see that it is applying a new color palette. The blue, shall we say, is just a little different. It's still loading everything up. It's just taking a little bit of time here. And we might just come back to this. There's a SharePoint Framework solution that is that will add a top header. So that was the extension, was just using a header, and you might be using that maybe for global navigation or something like that. So don't know why it's not working right now, but I'm going to go ahead and leave that in interest in time. All right, let's keep moving forward. So site designs are a great way to provide an out-of-the-box provisioning experience if you wanted to. So there is another way that we have been provisioning sites for the last couple of years, and it's still very valid and still can be useful. And that's using the SharePoint PnP or SharePoint Patterns and Practices Initiative, which is an open source initiative and really an open source community for sure, where a whole bunch of people, not only just SharePoint experts, but a lot of SharePoint enthusiasts are coming together and building and providing and sharing code and samples and best practices, and videos and tutorials are being created. And it's just a powerful collection of SharePoint. This is not your SharePoint development of a couple of years ago. I mean, we really have got tools at our fingertips now that make SharePoint development just so much easier and quicker. You can find that over on github.com/SharePoint/PnP. Two of the things that I think are really cool in PnP are PnP PowerShell. So there's some PowerShell commandlets that have been provided by the PnP community that helps us manage and maintain SharePoint using PowerShell even better and easier. And there's also PnP Core, which is what basically PnP PowerShell is based on. Well, PnP Core allows us to interact with SharePoint much more easily using code, using something like C# or something like that. So we can build console apps, or maybe we'd be using something like Azure Functions to be able to interact with SharePoint. Now, there is another component as well called PnP provisioning templates. And provisioning templates, they are similar to site designs, shall we say, in a sense. They're older. They're definitely been around a lot longer. They're more mature. They give you more actions. There's more things you can do with provisioning templates than you can do with site designs. So let's go ahead and think about how we might use PowerShell in order to connect to and work with SharePoint to provision SharePoint. One of the first things you always need to do in PnP PowerShell is run a command connect PnP online. That's where you're going to connect to a given SharePoint site that you want to work with. Now, what's cool about the Connect PnP Online is you do not need to connect to the tenant admin, even though the URL I provided here would be a tenant admin. Oh, no, it's not. Never mind. You can just basically connect to any site within your tenant. You can start to manipulate it. You do not need to be an tenant administrator as you would with the SharePoint Online management tool. Once connected, you can do some pretty cool things, such as you can run a command new PnP site. That will allow you to create a new modern team site or a communication site. You can also run new PnP tenant site. That would allow you to use PowerShell to provision classic experiences. You can create new groups as well. So like you can run a new PnP unified group, and you can actually create yourself a whole Office 365 group. So those are kind of primary ways that you might be adding sites. Once there, you can run another command, apply PnP provisioning template. That would be a common command that you would use to actually apply a provisioning template, which we're going to look at shortly here, so don't worry, we'll get into that. And the last one I think is actually pretty cool and sophisticated is you can apply a site design using PowerShell. Now, why might you want to do this? Let's say that there was some sort of provisioning process where you want to use PowerShell to automate the provisioning of a site, and once it's provisioned, you then want to apply a site design. Great, you don't need to use the UI to do any of that. You could actually just script that all up using PowerShell and invoke any site design and apply any site design you want. Or maybe you update a site design and you wanted to force the update so that the site design was reapplied to a given site or collection of sites. Yeah, no problem. You can go ahead and apply site designs as well. The way that the provisioning aspects works is you need a provisioning template, which is basically an XML file. It's based on a schema that gets updated currently, I think it's almost about twice a year, maybe a little less. You can also get a provisioning template from an existing site. So let's say you go and build yourself a site on your SharePoint Online tenant. You configure it the way you want. You add lists and libraries and content and all kinds of cool stuff. You can then get a provisioning template, and the PnP PowerShell aspects will go and build a provisioning template for you. The catch to that is it won't grab content. So let's say you had a document library and you wanted to add documents in it as part of your provisioning process. Getting a provisioning template will not go and download that for you as well. You'll still need to do that manually. Once you have that provisioning template, you can of course connect to PnP Online. If a site's already been provisioned, you can just go ahead and apply your provisioning template on top of the site that you just connected to. So you would connect PnP Online, give it the URL of the site that you want to apply the provisioning template to, then you can just apply the provisioning template. I believe a better use case for this is where you're actually going to build a PowerShell script. So you're not going to be running these commands individually. You'll build some sort of script to help automate the process of provisioning and managing your SharePoint site, your SharePoint tenant. Or you might be using something like PnP. You might be use something like Azure Functions in order to automate the provisioning using PnP PowerShell. Something that I want to talk about as well is that PnP provisioning does not allow you to, it doesn't include a way to unprovision. So if you do want to unprovision or uninstall, basically what you really need to do is you'll have to build a collection of commands that would remove all of the components you added sort of one at a time. Some common things would be like to reset the logo or any alternative CSS or CSS on a classic site. You can then run commands if you have like custom actions on classic sites as well. It's just something to think about with PnP provisioning is there is no explicit remove command. So let's go ahead and let's look at how we can use PowerShell to go ahead and provision on into SharePoint. Alrighty, let's go back to our trusty scripts here so that's easier to work with. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to connect to my SharePoint tenant. So this is now using PnP PowerShell, whereas before I was using the SharePoint management shell. So I can connect to PnP Online. I'm basically just connecting to any site within my tenant, and I do need to have enough access to be able to run the next commands. So if you don't have the right to create a site within your tenant because your tenant manager has removed that from you, you won't be able to run the following commands. But basically, I've now connected into my tenant, so I can now start to work with it. I told you there's a command new PnP site. So let's go ahead and create a site. We'll create a site. We want to use the team site template. We'll go ahead and we'll give it a title. I'm going to go ahead and change that title here in a second. You need to give it an alias for a team site because basically it needs to create an Office 365 group in the backend. And I'm even going to say, hey, this is a public site. So let's go ahead and say we'll give it a title of Provision T Site Demo ESPC webinar. And we'll give it a ESPC demo team site. Okay, so let's see how quick this actually really goes. So I executed the command, and we're about 5 seconds in, about 7 seconds in, 10 seconds in. Yeah, it's normally actually a little quicker than this. Can't really tell you what's going on. There we go. So we have a new site. Let's go ahead and let's load up this URL and see if it actually loaded, if it actually was created, which I'm fully assuming it would be. And what do we got here? Perfect, not bad. Now, nothing has happened. We just created a classic team site because that's the available commands that we had for us. Whoops. So let's go ahead and let's do something more. So let's say that we want to connect to that site now. So let's go ahead now, let's connect to that site to do something else to it. So I'm going to now change my context so that I'm going to connect to the site that we just created. And maybe I want to install an app. Maybe there's some sort of application, there's a SharePoint app that I created. Now I can run a command, something like install PNP app. I can go ahead and execute that. Now I need to get the identity. I already got the identity before, but you can go and grab the identities of all of the SharePoint framework solutions you've created, and ooh, wow, the app was already created. It's already been added. So how would I go and look at that? If I go to site contents, what we should see here, there we go. It is now provisioning the app that I just created, and it's grayed out because it's still in the process. So not too bad. So far, we're in line with what we want to do. Okay, so let's say I want to apply a provisioning template. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply this provisioning template now. And then we'll go ahead and we'll go look at what that provisioning template looks like here. So it's applying a provisioning template. There's going to be some feedback here, but I'm going to go ahead and let's look at that template. And let's see what we've got here. So this template is pretty simple. In fact, it's doing what we just did, which I'm totally okay with. I sort of did this on purpose. A provisioning template allows you to do all sorts of stuff, but one of the things that it could do is you can add custom actions. And that custom action is, hey, I would like to go ahead and install or activate a solution. So let's go ahead and let's look to the right and we'll see what's actually happening here. I am telling a specific component that, hey, you should go ahead and be activated, which what this should do is it should turn on the application customizer for the solution that I installed in the previous step. All right, so let's go ahead and let's see what we're doing. It looks like it's done. So let's go ahead and return to this page. And let's see if this all works out. What we're looking for is a header to appear. Now, I might need to activate a SharePoint Framework solution in my localhost. I thought that I had the header working, but we will have to wait and see. What I was looking for was that header to appear, but let's keep moving on, just in interest in time. We didn't get any errors, so that's a good thing. It means things are working well. All right, so let's say we want to go ahead and we want to invoke a site design. We want to apply a site design. So we can go ahead and basically go and get the site designs. We go grab all the site designs. We're looking for a specific title. And then based on that, we want to go ahead and we want to invoke that. Oh, that's kind of cool. All right, so I need to make sure that I have the right site design name, which would be, I think it is, yes, provision team site design demo. So let's go ahead and correct that. I think that is correct. Perfect. Execute this command. So using PowerShell here, I can actually provision I can actually apply that site design, and that happens, and you can even get a feedback of what all happens. So what did it do? Well, it applied the theme. It did not apply the logo, we know that. And we can see all of the other aspects that were completed for us. Now, at the bottom, you'll see install SPFX solution failed. That's because I already activated it. So pretty cool stuff that we can do with PNP PowerShell in order to provision sites. And you could take all of the stuff I just did, and you could script a lot of that up, right? You can script all of this up so that you could just have one PNP PowerShell command that you could create for yourself, provided a few variables, and it would automatically execute this for you. And you might have this as a use case because you don't want end users to be able to use the UI to provision, or maybe you want some sort of provisioning process where people ask for sites and using the SharePoint list or something. And then once you're ready, you can go ahead and provision this for them. Or again, you could wrap this up maybe in code, and after an approval process, this PowerShell commandlet might be executed for you. So I kind of want to do that next. I want to go ahead and take everything I just did and wrap it up into an Azure function, and then use that Azure function and execute it somehow, and have the provisioning ran for me. Okay, so you don't have to use Azure Functions. You could just use Azure Web Apps, or really kind of any web service you might want. But I'm using Azure Functions here primarily because it's really easy to secure the Azure Functions with Azure Active Directory, so that if I gave you the URL to my Azure function, you couldn't do anything with it unless you had security credentials for my tenant. The other thing I like about Azure Functions is it's really easy to use PNP PowerShell or PNP Core, so I can use PowerShell or like C# or something to build my application. They're headless, so they're really inexpensive to run and just super, super easy to use. Now, how would you call the Azure function? The example I really wanted to provide here and was working till yesterday morning was I was going to use a SharePoint Framework web part. And this is where I didn't have time, unfortunately, to use something like Power Apps or Flow. But basically, you need something to securely call that Azure function. And as soon as SharePoint Framework 1.6 fully rolls out, I fully expect this to be running. If you'd like to get more information on how I put together this demo, I am providing a link here. There is also a collection of all my links at the end of this whole slide deck so that you can get all the links at once. The way this whole thing's supposed to work is that what happens is when you load a SharePoint page or something like that, SharePoint goes to AAD and asks for a token, authorization token for that specific user. So then when the user then through using SharePoint now goes and talks to the Azure function, they send along that token. The Azure function can go back to Azure Active Directory and say, hey, is this an authenticated user? And if they are, excellent. It can return, it can do what it's supposed to do, and it's going to return some sort of results to something like SharePoint Align or Power Apps or Flow or whatever to be able to do the next step. So let's go ahead and let's look at the process of what I was able to set up, and we can kind of go from there. Now, one of the things that we need to do is one of the easy ways to get an Azure function to speak back into SharePoint is to use a SharePoint app. So I've already created a SharePoint app, but we should be able to see that here. I'm going to start closing down some extra windows here. Let's see here. There it is. So there's the apps that you can create within SharePoint, and I've already created an app and I've already granted access to it. And so I've already looked it up for you so you can sort of see the SharePoint app. What happens when you create an app, though, is you end up getting a client ID, which is what you're seeing here, and you also get a secret as well. You need to provide it the permissions that you want the SharePoint app to allow. And in this case, the permissions I allowed was basically full control. So if I were to give you this app ID, which you've got that, but you also have my secret, you could then use that to interact with my SharePoint site, basically with full control, which is pretty cool and sophisticated. I get it, but I'm just going to do my best not to let you see my secret. Okay, so I want to create a function, Azure function now. So I'm going to create a function app that allows me to communicate into my SharePoint site. So I'm in Azure now, the Azure portal. If I go over to function apps, now I've created an Azure function app already. This one here is called PnP Demo Azure Function AAD. And within that, what's going to happen is my functions will eventually load. But while that's happening, what we should be able to see is if we go to authentication and authorization, we'll see that Azure Active Directory authorization is currently activated. And what's happening here is I have tied in my Azure function, my function app, to an Azure Active Directory application. So I'm going to show that in the next demo, but I have an application, an AAD application within Azure, which that has been given access to be able to basically sign in as the user. That's really all I'm doing is I'm able to connect my function app directly into my AAD. All right, so let's go ahead, let's go back to that function app because I want to show you what that app looks like. There we go. And my functions are slowly loading. There we go, perfect. So I have a function here, and this is a PowerShell function. So I'm able to use PowerShell. Some people may say, oh, I thought PowerShell is not fully supported in Azure Functions. That's not fully true. And yeah, I think that it still is very valuable, and I can't see this going away anytime soon, and I'm definitely not seeing it not allowed. So what's happening here is I'm taking the input, which should just be raw input, and I'm assuming it's going to be JSON, but I'm looking and assuming I'm going to have some properties, things like a name, alias, and public. Now, I'm not doing any error checking, totally get that. But what you can see, the important stuff is I'm able to connect to my SharePoint Align site, and I'm using the SharePoint application and secret that I've created, and I've just stored that into my environment variables. I could then run some of the PnP PowerShell command lines you saw in the previous demo. I could create a new site. I could then connect to that site. I can install an app. I could apply a provisioning template even, all stored within my Azure function, completely in the cloud. I can even go ahead and invoke a site design. Now this does work. Unfortunately, what has happened in the SharePoint framework code, which I can show you though, is I'm getting that error that just threw it out because of the SharePoint Framework 1.6. So basically, the SharePoint Framework solution is a simple form. It collects some information. It collects the name, the alias, and if it's public or not. And it's basically going to use the AAD HTTP client available in SharePoint Framework to go and post that information as JSON to my Azure function. But because my Azure function is secured by AAD, I don't need to worry about the credentials or authorization for connecting to my AAD HTTP client. That's all handled for me. All of my code, so you can see this, is all on GitHub. And once 1.6 is running, I will update this code if necessary. But it basically works just fine. As soon as this particular method is executed, handles create site, it goes ahead and it spins up that Azure function for us, and it just completes. It's just so easy and beautiful. We're going to see that sort of happen in the next demo anyhow. So in the next two demos. So I'm going to keep moving forward. We're actually going to see a lot of the cool stuff that I'm talking about here happen in other ways as well. So let's just kind of keep moving on. I got two more demos, two other kind of big ways to provision in SharePoint. So the next thing is sort of combining the first set of demos that we have here. I mentioned that site scripts include a verb or an action, which is trigger flow. It allows us to trigger a flow within our tenant. A really common use case here is that the flow will actually execute an Azure function. And the reason why you might do this again is because there are certain things that site scripts still can't do, such as add content or add pages. So if you create a site design, you've now got a user interface-based way for your end users, to be able to create SharePoint sites. They can create your team sites and comm sites and whatnot in the UI. They don't need any kind of PowerShell command list or code or anything like that. But one of that actions could then be to trigger an Azure function, and now the Azure function can go in and do things maybe that your site scripts can't do, or maybe there's some line of business aspects or components or code that you need to have executed. The trigger flow provides us that functionality. It's pretty easy to do and set up. Basically, we have a verb, it's trigger flow. You give it the URL to the flow, and you need to send along some very specific parameters. All of that's documented on the URL that I provided here over on docs.microsoft.com. How this works, the idea here is that when your site is being provisioned on step one, that trigger flow action is then executed. That then uses the URL of the flow to execute the flow. The most simple use case is basically your flow does one thing. It grabs the request and it posts the URL of the site that was just created, because that's the one thing that the trigger flow does, is it basically provides the URL of the site that was just created to the flow. Your flow can then take that URL and put it into an Azure storage queue. That's it, just the URL of the newly created site on a storage queue. You could then create an Azure function, and that Azure function is tied to the storage queue. So anytime anything is added to the storage queue in Azure, your Azure function will then get fired. Your Azure function can now take that URL and do whatever it is you need to do. You can use that URL. You can now connect to SharePoint Online. You can connect to that site, and you can do things like apply maybe a PEP provisioning template. And it works pretty well, pretty easy. All right, so let's look at that. This one's going to get a little more complex because we have a lot of moving pieces. But let me kind of show you the important stuff here. Let's first of all go ahead and let's look at the flow in question, because I've already set a lot of this stuff up. Let's go ahead and let's go here to flow. Perfect. So I've got a couple flows already created. The one I care about here is this bottom one, and you can just create the flow yourself. Basically, it's a very simple flow. I told you it was simple. If we go ahead and we edit the flow, it does two things. When an HTTP request is received, so here's that URL that my site script is going to execute on the trigger flow action. I needed a schema, and the schema is provided for us basically in the documentation, because this is what the site script is going to be sending into the flow. That's it. So when an HTTP request was received, do something. What is it we want to do? We just want to put a message on a storage queue. That's it. So we do need a storage queue, of course. That happens over in storage accounts. Now I have the storage queue already created here. I mean, you can see that the delays it's taking me, that if I had to create all this stuff, it'd probably take us, a couple hours to get through all the demos. So I've already created all these things. All of this is documented. Everything I'm doing here is documented in the links that I provided, by the way. So you can spend the time it will take to sort of walk through all these steps, but at least you've now seen the overall process. But there are queues that you can add in a storage queue, and one of them is that I've created is just this dev1 test prov q1 storage queue. And if we go back to Flow, we will see that's the exact same storage queue that I'm connecting to. And all I'm doing is I'm putting the web URL on that into that queue. So now I've got an Azure function that I've created as well that is tied to that storage queue. So we're going to go back to function apps. Here we're going to I have a different function app that I created for just that storage queue. It's also named Q1. Within that, there will be a function that will load up eventually. And that function is tied to that storage queue. So anytime that storage queue gets a new entry, it will go ahead and it will execute that. And in interest in time, because I always run out of time because I have so much fun stuff that I want to share. There it goes. I've got a Azure function. Again, this is using PowerShell. This one is significantly more simple than my other one. Basically, it's just getting the input, it's connecting to SharePoint, and it's applying a provisioning template to that URL. So this would be an Azure function that is going to get triggered by Flow, and that Flow is being triggered because of a specific site script action that I created. So let's go ahead and let's look at what that might look like. So here is that site script that I want to run. You can see the verb trigger flow, then the URL and whatnot that I want to provide. So let's go ahead and let's load that into memory. Let's go ahead and let's add a new site script. And let's go ahead and let's create a new site design that is executing that site script. So I have a new site design that should be custom team site design with Flow. So let's go ahead and let's create a new site for us. Let me just quickly grab that URL and put that here. And what we're going to do now is once this loads, we'll go to create site. We're going to create a team site eventually. This is definitely not loading as quick as it has in the past. There we go. And I should now have a site design. Perfect. My custom team site design with Flow has been created. So let's go ahead and we'll say ESPC web in our demo with Flow. We'll add a little space there because it makes me feel good. Excellent. It doesn't matter if it's private here, but this time we want it private. And once this is created, let's go ahead and click on finish. And this will load up our site for us, and we should see on the right-hand side, we'll get that window that appears. Now, while that's happening, I'm going to go back to Flow. And what should happen is in the run history, 2 seconds ago. Not bad. So it looks like our flow succeeded 2 seconds ago. If we actually go here and we look at our logs, this hasn't executed yet because I wasn't paying attention. Okay. It's still perfect. So it did trigger the flow and it added the event. If I go to view updated site, what we should see here, no, so the flow is still, it looks to be running the Azure function. What happens is the provisioning script that I ran is, let's see if I can quickly find that provisioning script for us. The provisioning script that I ran, all it's supposed to be doing is it's creating a new page. So here's a much more sophisticated provisioning script. It's creating a new page called home.pnp.aspx. That is a modern page. It's creating sections and rows, and it's adding even web parts directly to the page, and it is even setting the home page of this new modern team site to be this new page that I just created. That's in theory what's supposed to be happening. Let's see if I reload it and go to the home page. Something is still not something happened with the Azure function. Must be that it's Oh, there it goes. Okay, it just took some time to run. If you look at the bottom, you can see that it just took time for the Azure function to load up the first time, and we're getting that blue text telling us that the function app started, an incoming request came in, and it connected to the site. There it goes, functions completed. So now if we return here, and we return to the home page, what should happen is our home page should now be home. There it goes, home PNP. You can see it. And now you can see I have a very different home page. It's loading here. You can already tell the text. So not too bad if you think about it, that you can use PNP provisioning to set up new home pages. You can build pages using your custom and out-of-the-box web parts, and you can pre-configure them to do some really cool stuff. Okay. So I'm running out of time, but I want to kind of go one step further. What if we had a SharePoint list? People were able to interact with that SharePoint list using a Power App. When an item was added to the SharePoint list, such as I would like a new site created, would you admin please create that for me? A flow is triggered, which asks for approval. Once approval is granted, an Azure function is triggered. That Azure function goes and provisions a SharePoint site. It applies a site design. That site design includes a site script, which includes trigger flow action, which will go and trigger flow yet again. It'll put something on the storage queue, a URL of the storage queue, which will then maybe activate yet another Azure function to run our PNP provisioning. Totally possible. So it's kind of what I just talked about there. You have a Power App that's going to add something, that's going to add a data to a SharePoint list. When an item is added to a SharePoint list, Flow will be kicked in. It will throw something on a storage queue saying, hey, you need to go do something. An Azure function is executed, maybe using something like site designs in PowerShell. That will then trigger the creation of a site script, a site design, a SharePoint site with a site design. A site script might trigger Flow again, put something on a storage queue, and then run an Azure function yet again, and updating SharePoint maybe for the second, third, or fourth time as needed. So here's my last demo. I basically run out of time, so what I want to show you is the Power App itself. So I basically created a simple Power App, and if I load this, there it goes. So I can maybe do something like ESPC webinar demo 2 alias ESPC PC webinar demo 2. We'll make it public, let's say. We'll go ahead and say yes, that's fine. All right, so let's go ahead and let's go back to the SharePoint list. I have a SharePoint list here that I created, and you should see that that will show up here in a second. Perfect, that just got created. So it's the Power App is loaded, is connected to that. Let's see, let's go ahead and let's go to Outlook, because Outlook would be where the flow is moving next. So I'm going to be able to go to the edit flow and look at the actions. And what we'll see here is when an item is created, start an approval process, which will send an email out based on a condition. If it's yes, we go ahead and we tell the approver, but we update the SharePoint item. We go and grab it, and we basically put the URL on a message queue, which could then be used to trigger an Azure function. And so basically, that's what's happening here. We can see I just got an email in, so request for eOverfield to create this ESPC webinar demo 2, and then once this loads, eventually, always fun how it takes a little bit of time when you've got only a minute left. I will be asked eventually if I will approve this or not. Oh, geez, fun stuff. All right, eventually this email, there it goes. Approve. Come on, let's go. Keep moving. Approve, there we go. Submit, working on it. Good. Okay, slowly that's working. So I have an email approval that went through. If I go back to my flow, we should see that the run history a minute ago has finally succeeded. It's running through Power App, it's running through Azure Functions, it's provisioning the site, etc. And the whole thing is getting created. But I'm basically out of time, so I really want to finish up the slide deck for you so you've got it. We have some of these different provisioning resources available to us. So you aren't stuck with what's just available through the UI. There's other things you can do. I have all of my links here put in one spot. My suggestion is go ahead and download the slide deck, which I provided. And really with that, I'm coming in under the wire here with seconds to go. I really appreciate everyone's time. I'm sure there were questions. If there were, I'm happy to get to them afterwards. Shane, I'll kind of hand it back to you with about a minute to go.
Great, Eric. I was kind of wondering will that web page ever load as well, but it
I know.
did.
It happens.
It happens. Yeah, there is a few questions in, Eric, but I suppose it's best at this stage if they could reach out to you directly, maybe on Twitter or something like that. You can pick up the conversation there. How does that sound?
Absolutely. I will find a way to address all those questions for you all and handle it. Yes, I'll write a blog post. I'll do something.
Great. Super. Eric, thank you so much for taking the time out today. We always appreciate your input. So much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody. Great evening.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, everybody. That's all for today. See sharepointeurope.com/register- for webinars for further details on all upcoming webinars, or visit our resource center for all previous webinars. That is all for today. A massive big thank you to Eric Overfield once again for taking the time out today for the webinar. Very much appreciated on behalf of the community. Thank you all for attending and have a great day. Thank you and goodbye.